Someone had asked during the table talk time if there's a preferred search engine. Like, do you trust Google search if you're going to,
Yes. So it depends. If you have got privacy questions, things like DuckDuckGo, so other ones that don't keep track, Google is a money-making machine, and they do a lot with tracking sponsored content. So if you're doing a Google search, don't expect you're getting objective information. You're getting information that's paid for, you're getting information that is adjusted to you, so you need to be aware of it if you're doing that. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk today. That's been really helpful. I just had a quick question on what's your thoughts on use of technology for unwinding time? I know my husband and I are very prone to going, we're tired after work, we're going to just sit here and unwind. And then I find myself going, am I actually unwinding? Is this making it worse? I feel like my anxiety levels go up when I try to unwind,
Yes, and actually, there's one researcher who does a lot with it, and she argues that if you really want to feel better, do anything except a screen. Take a walk, do something creative, sing, whatever it is. So I think you have to pay attention to yourself, but for a lot of people, media is not relaxing. It actually engages us. The light can stimulate our brains, especially at night. Even adults need to be very careful because sleep can be disrupted by that. But if you notice you just feel anxious or pumped up, it probably is not helping. So there are certain types of music that do actually relax people, but video games don't tend to. A lot of television doesn't tend to. So I think you're on the right track and thinking, what else could I do that would actually relax me? And again, for everybody, they recommend at least an hour off of screens before bed. More is better.
So we have a software on my teenage son's phone that it tries to limit how much he gets, where, if he gets risky searches, I'll get a notice, that kind of thing. How do you navigate, because he's going to be 16 this fall, how do you navigate eventually in preparing him mentally? Because it's not like he's got a problem. We talked about putting it on, and he's like, yeah, I'd really like that,
Yeah.
But how do you help him prepare as life begins to pressure more on him and as he leaves our home and that sort of thing? What does that look like? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question. I love the fact that you talked with him about it, because that's one of the things that they recommend is not surprising kids, especially older ones, and talking about if you're doing monitoring equipment at all, and them being part of that. Sometimes a lot of adults choose to monitor themselves. So one of the things is to talk about, if this is helpful for you, is that something you want to continue? If so, what's the best self-monitoring? I still do some timers and things like that on things that I'm more prone to, okay, it's been 4 hours and I've been still working on my computer and it's not good for my eyes and it's not good for my posture. I need to take breaks. So a friend and I actually will set 20-minute timers to look off in the distance and stand up. And so I still do self-monitoring, and I'm a lot older. So I think, talk about, do you want to still self-monitor? But I think you're right to start early. It's going to be another year and a half or so, and you're going to be out of our house, and we're going to be getting, what are the things we think we need to work on? What are some things that you want to, as you're doing it, just as we would do that with laundry, I hope, and just as we would do that with cooking skills, I think it's great to talk through those media skills. What are the things that you feel confident about, that you're making good decisions on your own? What are the things that you and I can sit down and research and think about and talk about more? So, and it sounds like he's already talking with you, which is awesome. That's a great sign that he probably would continue to do that.
As much as a 16-year-old does.
As much as a 16-year-old does, yes. Yes, absolutely. How was your day? Good. Yeah, that's, okay, excellent. Yeah.
I don't know. I've been thinking about the privacy aspect and how it's so different. Like earlier you were talking about how you had the phone connected to the wall and you'd go into the other room to talk to your friend, kind of have some privacy. I feel like when I talk to a lot of people I know who have children around my age, they feel there's a privacy issue with having access to everything that your child is looking at, everything they are doing. as if it were a diary or something. And I kind of feel like across the board, we treat all of this as like, it's like an extension of ourselves almost, as we, like our online use is kind of a brain map almost of what we've been doing. And I guess like, I don't know what the question is exactly, except for you to speak on that and like, how do we navigate that, I guess?
Yeah, and you bring up a really challenging question. I think most experts that really spend time in this field argue that you start with monitoring, but you move to mentoring. And it's figuring out where do you do that and when do you do that. That's hard. And it can be kid specific. Some children are much more mature at certain ages than others. Some I've already proven they can handle media better, in which case we can probably back off a little of the monitoring. And even say, like, my son's 16, so I'm already thinking through, okay, you're gonna be out of my house fairly soon, and I'm not gonna be monitoring you. What do I want to have in place? What are the things that I'm hoping you're making these good choices with? So I think when we think about the teen years especially, I think we do wanna think about how do I mentor? How do I get, and even talk with kids along those lines? Like, for a while we've been doing this, and we're getting ready to, you can even have a contract, we're getting ready to let you have more freedom with that. We're gonna have a contract for a couple of months and see if you can handle this new part of it. And let's talk about what that's gonna look like, and let's agree to it, and let's write it down if we feel like the early part of it. And then we begin to back off a little on the monitoring if we've done Net Nanny or any of those kinds of monitoring things. I think that's the teen years are so important. And in part that talking and keep talking, even if they don't want to talk. I find talking in the car is good because they're not looking at you, and it's a captive audience. Okay, let me drive you to that. But those are some of those kinds of conversations can happen there where you're beginning to get them to think. And some teens actually you'll find are different. Some are chomping at the bit for independence. Others are a little scared. And it's a hard conversation. They don't want to have it because they're not yet ready to recognize that they're getting that close to adulthood. So part of it's knowing your kid and where are they at in that maturity and that ready to face adulthood spectrum. I don't know if that's too general an answer or if that's helpful. Okay, yeah.
My oldest son is 10, and I was thinking about the 13 years of the limit or the age that you should be on the social media. Yeah. So there's a lot of his friends that are starting to get on, like I think it's called Kids Messenger that Facebook has. Any advice for a parent of a 10-year-old to start introducing him to means of communicating and like we've talked, it's the way that they connect with each other oftentimes now. So any advice there would be appreciated.
Yeah, and Facebook is such a challenging one for me, just because they don't have a good track record of caring for the people that are on Facebook. So that's, if you follow any of the court cases against them, all the fines they've had, et cetera, I am concerned, and a lot of people have been concerned that they've been trending now younger and trying to have, let's get these kids on the social media younger. So I balance that. At one level, I'm like, that makes me a little nervous. At the next level, if their friends are already on there and they're kind of like, I really want to be part of this too, I think that's again where you do your research and you sit down with them. It's kind of that same idea of driving, teaching somebody to drive. They don't drive alone the first time. They drive with you. Let's sit down and let's both go on it and we'll talk that through. Or let's just see what people are posting the first time. Let's just see how this works. Oh, that sounds like a wise thing. What did you think of that post? Okay, all right, let's try it out. I'm gonna sit by you and let's talk about it. And before you post, I'm gonna say yes or no. Okay, and then just have it kind of the training wheels, and eventually are they showing respect and responsibility, and are they getting it? Are they getting what's a problem to post, what is okay to post? So I wouldn't say no, but I would say I would be very careful, and I would be very systematic with it and say, this is a privilege, and to get that privilege, this is what you need to show me you can do. Okay, does that help? Yes. Okay, yeah. It is a complicated world right now. and decisions we never faced ourselves for many of us.
So this question goes a little bit outside of social media, but the question that if you can give us some insight into is how do you develop critical thinking skills? Because in reality, critical thinking is what will allow people to discern what they watch, what they don't watch, how it affects them, and how they personally need to make decisions when they're in their 20s about what they believe and what they don't believe.
Yeah. That's an excellent question. One of my favorite books that I read in the process of learning was about the teenage brain, the adolescent brain. And it just takes a while. The brain develops from the back toward the front. The front is the prefrontal cortex is where we make good decisions, where we think through. It's a lot of our best critical thinking. And teens are just in the process of getting there. And so it's a long process to get that happening. And I think we have to be patient because it's very easy as a parent to be like, why would you do something stupid like that? Because sometimes we forget what we were like at 14 or 13 or whatever it is. But I think we have to take seriously the fact that their brains are developing and continuing to develop. And you may have seen some of the latest research that suggests it's not completely formed until the mid-20s. And again, the higher level functioning is one of the latter things to develop. So I think we have to have a lot more of that, again, mentoring, scaffolding, those kinds of things. Critical thinking skills are developed in a lot of ways. One of those is just talking things through. What do you think about that? It's part of the reason why I don't want parents just to always say, this is the rule. Have those conversations, help people be thinking about media critically, but help them be thinking about lots of things critically. Help them to think about their faith. Help them to talk about what's going on that way. If there's something going on at school, tell me about that. Or if there's something that particular topic they're interested. Okay, you're really into golf, whatever it is. Let's talk about that. Find ways that they can be expressing that critical thinking in lots of different places, and know it will take a while to develop. That's why I'm pretty hard and fast on the 13 for social media. Is it's legal, and also I really don't want people younger than that on social media because they're not necessarily going to make great choices. Even a 13-year-old isn't necessarily going to make great choices, but they'll probably make better choices than a 9-year-old. That makes sense. It's just knowing where they're at. But even so, I have a new driver in my house. Does he always make the best choices? I didn't. He's a much better driver than I was at 16. But I'm not expecting people on media to make great choices all the time. That's why we need to be co-watching, co-with them, belong to their social media networks. So I realize that's a longish answer, but there's a lot that goes into developing critical thinking, and it doesn't develop well for a while, if that makes sense. So that's part of why I think we have to be very careful at these younger ages when things are getting pushed down younger. I am worried about 8-year-olds with smartphones. I don't think that's a good idea at all, because they're just not ready, in my opinion. When you're getting to 14-year-olds, okay, with some coaching, then I'm more comfortable with it.
So we're not there yet, but how do you navigate your kids' friends having things that their parents, don't have the privacy controls or whatever that you would have on your kids' phones? Like, how do you? It could be in public areas, but it also could be like if they're going over their house or things like that.
Yeah, this is a perpetual issue, and honestly, I think if you're living a wise life as a parent, you will definitely wait on things that other parents are not waiting on. And I think part of that is this you being the parent and going, I recognize that your friends are on this. This is when it's okay for our household, or these are the steps you need to show me before you're ready. Or you know what, it's not even legal for them to be on right now. And we're waiting until the legal age that you can be on. I think there's explaining the limits that we choose. And this has always been the case. Even when I was a kid, people at sleepovers would do things differently. I remember calling my mom and having her pick me up from a sleepover because they were doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and I knew it. But she'd raised me enough to say, at any time you call me, I don't care if it's 2 a.m, I'll come get you if something isn't right. So, I mean, I knew that. So that's part of that whole talking and talking and talking some more about why that is. You can take the sarcastic route. That's what my younger sister did. She was like, yeah, you're the only kid in 6th grade without a phone, and you're going to be the only kid in 7th grade without a phone, so get used to it. You can do that. I have chosen a different approach. You have to know my sister. It worked fine for her. But I have done just a lot of talking, and there are a lot of things that my son didn't get that other people did or didn't get at the times. But he always knew why. He always knew why. And so, but that's one of the hard parts of parenting is deciding I understand, but it's not okay, and this is why it's not okay, or why it's not wise, even for your friends. And sometimes I've found that once they learn that, they tell their friends, that's not smart. Do you know how this works? It's great, it's fun to overhear stuff like that. You're like, yes, you tell them. Does that help a little bit? Yeah,
Like, I guess, how would you coach your child to do, like, if they're in a situation where they're with their friend and they're on their phone and they're, on TikTok or something that you don't allow, like,
yeah.
What would you?
Yeah, one of the recommendations is to run through those scenarios ahead of time. A lot of times play dates, especially when you're younger, I think it's good to ask the other person, what are your policies? So even as young as they are, you could ask something along those lines, and then you kind of work it out with the parents ahead of time, hopefully, if they're open to that. I know I had those kind of parent conversations when my son was younger and we were doing play dates. We would talk about it, and I would talk about it and say, what is allowed and what isn't in your household. So I think that can be one way to do it. But again, playing out the scenario. Okay, what is okay and what isn't? And can you practice telling your friend, I'm really not supposed to be on that, or I'm not allowed to be on that. Could we do something else? Can I suggest this instead? And again, it can also depend on what they're doing on it. Let's prank somebody else. Terrible idea. Not a good idea to talk about the places where kids really get in trouble. Sometimes kids will do things with other kids that they wouldn't do on their own. And so I think it's just so worth walking through those scenarios before they get into them and say, here's what I'd like you to do. Yeah. And I'm sorry we all have to deal with this, but we do. It's just a reality of the world we're living in right now. And it's hard if you're trying to be wise. It's just hard. It's worth it, but it's hard.
I got one more, Andy. So I've heard this over and over through tables and different portions of the room today. This is what our kids do, or this is how they communicate. I think as Christians specifically, we're called to live a little bit differently. What is the danger of not having that in your household? Like our son, there is no social media. He doesn't care about it anyway, but even if he did, it wouldn't be there. So can you speak to, I don't see it, but do you understand what I'm asking?
No, I do. And actually, it's not unusual for young boys sometimes, or even young men, to not care as much about social media as young women and young girls do. So boys are more likely to lean toward video games and to video gaming and interacting with people that way. Young women are more likely to lean towards social media. So especially for a young man, I would be, if he's like, I don't want to be involved in that drama, great, excellent. And then again, you'd say as they go on, I've done like every couple, checks, because my son was very similar actually. Are you interested in it now? Just periodic check-ins. Is that something we want to go through now? Is that something you want to be on now? And then once they're ready, then but if they're not asking for it, great. Then they will when they're ready. I do think it's a little more challenging in general for females because they're going to often want to be on it longer, earlier, those kinds of things. So if you're talking about social media specifically, that would be one thing I'd be.
Just all these different platforms.
Yes.
Whether it's TikTok or whatever. We don't allow it, and what is the danger there? What is the flip side from us being old-fashioned and crusty and saying, no, that junk isn't going to be in our house?
Yeah. Well, I think what you want to always be careful of is that they're not getting to the place where they're sneaking it.
Sure.
where they're finding other ways to get it, or that they're just counting down the days till they're out of the house, and then they're just going to do a free-for-all. If you're not seeing those signs, then it probably isn't a danger. If you are seeing an unhealthy interest in it, or they really want to be on it, then you probably want to find ways to mentor them to be on it in a controlled way while you still have the parenting ability. But if they're not asking for it and they're not showing signs of, then that's fine. They may not want it. And it's not unusual that some of my college students too they've deleted all kinds of social media because they've experimented with it a while and they're like, I don't want it in my life. So I think there are some people that are making those choices. And we ought to support them if that's the choices that they're making. Yeah.
Leading on that, thank you. Kind of with what you just talked about, I have like nieces and nephews who are college age, and they're still living at home. With COVID, it happened a lot. How do you, at that age, they're like 23, 24, do you have suggestions about like them being in chat rooms and things when their parents disagree with that, but they're like in chat rooms all day long?
Yeah. Oh, adult children. That's a whole nother can of worms. Yeah. I think at that point you try to inform and express concern. Just like you would with any adult child, you would be, here's information for you to consider. Now, again, if they're living in your house and dependent on you and using your Wi-Fi and you might be able to have a little bit more say on that. But generally, I think it's informing, even questioning. You seem tired all the time. What are you up doing? Those kind of things. You're just asking probing questions. Are you happy? How's your life going? Because often when they're doing that much, eventually it shows. It shows in some way. And when there's kind of questions, well, maybe we could try this. Maybe this would be something to try. But it becomes a lot more suggestion and information and praying. And praying some more, and praying with adult children, I think.
I'm curious if you would just share from your knowledge of time spent how you've seen students and capacity change over time.
This is a wonderful question to ask of any teacher. I ask it a lot because I'm interested, because I'm in the area of education. So one second grade teacher recently said the language that's used in the second grade classroom has changed a lot. Words that they didn't used to know are now being used. Talked to a middle school teacher who said just the level of anxiety and depression is noticeably different. A lot of teachers talk about focus, the ability to focus or concentrate or read. And that's one of the things I've definitely seen at the college level is I remember handing out a very short excerpt of a speech that we were going to look at. And I would literally watch some students and they'd look at it and then their eyes would go off. And then I put a video of the speech up and they all paid attention. So the ability to read is something a high school teacher recently said, that how long they take to read and how they don't comprehend as well. There's a lot of skills that we just aren't working on as much as we've moved more to visual skills. There are other skills that hand-eye coordination is off the charts. I've had to redo it. So there's certain things that are definitely getting better. But it's a very interesting conversation to have with teachers. The other big thing is I used to have my students come into the class and they'd interact with each other. And now, very commonly, they'll come in, put down their backpacks, and get on their phones until class starts. Silence, no interaction. That's been sad for me to watch. So things are changing. They're definitely changing.
So I hear so much about the negativity in education. And what can we do as parents to involve in the school system to encourage some kind of programming in which the kids are learning how to read and write? I have a 13-year-old that I interact with almost every other weekend. And he can't spell anything. And when I send him to go read something on a box, he doesn't know what he's reading. And my age group, I tell him with a grandmother voice that if you don't learn how to read, you'll never know your Bill of Rights. And you won't know when to edit them. I said, so learn to read. I said, and if you can't spell, you won't understand when you say you're reading the Bible, because you can't comprehend anything. I said, so change your mindset, and when you're with me, we're going to be reading and writing. And so, yeah, I can do that on a one-on-one, but how can we influence our school system to encourage more manual activity? Because that's what we've lost. We've gone digital, but why can't it partner?
Yeah, and this is going to be really interesting to watch. Some of you may be aware that teachers are leaving the profession in droves. It's very difficult right now, and that's not going to help. So I think one of the things we can be praying and thinking about is how do we help support young people in general, including in the schools. So sometimes there's reading buddies. There can be tutoring places we can volunteer. There can be library things. I do think we have a crisis brewing that's even bigger than the one we're dealing with right now. It's going to be part post-pandemic, but it's going to be part the loss of so many teachers and just using substitutes and having huge classes. And I don't really know what we're going to do. I know a school district near us, they're 100 teachers short. I mean, this is not getting better. I think one of the teaching programs, they're down 60% in students. Just people aren't going into the profession and people are leaving. So the schools are a real place of concern, especially if that's where we're a lot of socializing and a lot of things are happening. So I think we're right to be concerned about that. I also think within our homes, one of the things you can pair, some people do reading, like, reading can earn certain mass media points. So if you read for an hour, you can get, those kinds of things. You can argue whether you like those or not, but even having that reading as part of a requirement can at least get them to be reading. And I do think that is a skill we need to be concerned about. But I think we especially need to be prayerful and thoughtful about the school systems. Even if we homeschool or do other things, we're all impacted by the society that the school systems are producing. And I am worried. I will not lie, I am worried about what's happening and the loss of a lot of really good, experienced teachers that are just saying, I can't do it anymore. Yeah. On that happy note, no.
Thank you, Dr. Lindholm, for coming. Can we all say thanks to her?